Good afternoon and welcome to our first webinar of 2019. And a really good way, I think, to start actually, talking about change. Very pleased to have Holly Sorce today with us talking about how to support staff in the transition to agile working. Whose chair is it anyway? I think I spend a lot of my time working in the agile working area and novel ways of working. And a lot of the time I see a lot of really good initiatives perhaps not reach their full potential for other reasons, maybe because of behaviours and beliefs or not knowing what's going on. So I think this is a really important topic. And I'm really excited to have Holly with us today. Just a few bits of housekeeping to start us off. We will be recording this webinar, and so if you have any problems listening to it, it will be available on our website, so you can go back and listen to it. I'm also going to be able to take some questions and put some of them to Holly at the end of her presentation today. So if you type them into the questions box, I will do my best to get as many of them answered as I can at the end. So really, I think we're ready. And Holly, I think over to you.
That's great. Thank you, Catherine. And hello and welcome. Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to listen in to me today. I'm in dreary London in Chancery Lane. I'm sure you're all over the place. And it's Friday, so it's all good. So welcome, and I hope you enjoy the session. I'm a change management consultant, and I've spent the last few years working on refurbishment projects, agile/smart working projects, and so I'm seeing firsthand what we need to be doing to make sure that these projects are successful and that we all achieve the people-dependent return on investment that we need in order to realise the benefits. So I'm going to use this slot to give you an insight into the staff experience, how people respond to change, and how we can better deliver successful agile or smart working projects from a staff perspective. And so the first thing I just want to kick off and set the scene is to really be thinking about the implications on staff when we are asking them to change their ways of working and transition into an agile environment or a smart working environment, whatever it's called in your organization. I think that as people working in this area, we are always quite focused on the benefits. We've seen it be a success. We've seen staff productivity and well-being increase, and there can be a tendency to just be focusing in on those things rather than actually thinking about how our staff might be feeling. We're very close to the changes. We will have delivered these things multiple times and witnessed the benefits, but we need to really be thinking about what is it that staff have to go through. And we're really asking them to break the comfort of the possession culture. What I mean by possession culture is moving from that sense of this is my desk, my pedestal, these are my pot plants, this is my cup in my part of the cupboard. We're asking them to break that and move towards a desk sharing scenario, maybe having a locker instead of a pedestal, so people don't feel that they actually own anything, that nothing is theirs anymore. So I kind of call that the possession culture. We're asking them to change their very familiar surroundings. We know that people get very attached to their desks, even if their working environment is not very nice and needs a refurb and needs an upgrade. There's kind of comfort in familiarity, and we're disrupting that. We're asking them to change the proximity of their working relationships. It could be that we're asking teams to work across different zones, or maybe you turn up in the morning and you find a desk across a whole building and your team may not be with you. That can feel really difficult. And we're asking them fundamentally to change their working processes and their working practices. And it's change, and change is difficult. And that's why I've got the guy there that's feeling stressed out in the corner. And I think that we need to be cognizant of this in everything that we do in our engagement with staff to support them through the process, because it can generate a lot of feelings of anger and anxiety. And lots of questions that we must respond to as people working on these projects. Staff need to know the answers and they need to be guided in multiple areas. And some of the key things that I come across most of the time are here. We talk about hot desking or desk sharing. Staff want to know what that means and how is it going to operate, and what do I do if I come in to the office late because I have childcare? Am I going to get the bad desk that no one wants to sit at? Is there going to be a rota? What does that look like? And we need to be able to answer that. We talk often in Agile Smart projects about more remote working. This can be an alien concept to staff, and they need to understand what it means for them and what it means from an organizational perspective. Some of the terminology and the jargon there also needs to be explained. We talk about working from home. You will know that there are lots of issues attached to working from home and having to have a suitable working environment, having to have a comfortable place to sit in, quiet. How do I work from home? It seems obvious, but staff often need guiding in that space. There's often new IT attached to Agile projects. How do I learn that? How do I use Skype for Business if I'm working from home? Where's the support? Where's the guidance? New types of furniture, new spaces to work. If you're going from quite a traditional office setting and you're building spaces, neighborhood type spaces where you might have bookable pods for quiet working, informal spaces, project bays, high back sofas, these are new things for some people. They want to see what that looks like. They want to understand how that's going to work and how they need to engage with those spaces. And finally, we often use a bit of a soundbite. We say, new ways of engaging and communicating with teams. And that's often met with blank faces. People are like, huh? What does that mean? I don't understand. And these are some of the things that we have to answer. And we know that people really become attached to old ways of doing things, and change is quite difficult. So we need to be patient with staff, and we need to make sure that we're responding to their questions. Ultimately, what we need to be doing, I touched on it in the introduction, is we want to achieve people-dependent return on investment. We want to make sure that the space is improving productivity, improving well-being, improving our flexibility and our levels of autonomy about how and where we work. And there's a nice model which just illustrates the process that people need to go through in order to have a good individual change experience and to embed success in Agile projects. It's called the ADKAR model. And you can see it here in front of us. The steps that we need to follow and the things that we need to make sure that we've answered for staff is the A for awareness. Why is the project happening? Why do I have to do things differently? D for desire to participate and support the changes. Why would I want to do things differently? Why would I want to break the possession culture? Why would I want to move into a new Agile environment? What's in it for me? And then the K for knowledge. Once you've got them on board, they're aware and they have the desire. Okay, well, what's going to change and what skills am I going to need to be able to do things differently and operate in this new world? Excuse me. The A for ability, which is you need to be giving people the opportunity to do things differently, to be able to implement the new skills and behaviours, give them the opportunity to experiment and learn in the new environment. And finally, the last step of the journey is the reinforcement. Once the change has happened, how do I get the support that I need to maintain this different way of doing things? We know that given the opportunity, people will slide back into old ways of working. So as a project team, what are the reinforcement activities that we can deliver to make sure that the change sticks, essentially? Okay, so the next piece I want to move on to is called Neuroscience 101, and I just wanted to give you a bit of a brief introduction into how human beings experience change, because often in these types of projects we meet with anger, frustration and resistance, and from a neuroscience perspective there are actually reasons why that happens. And fundamentally our brains are hardwired to do two things: minimize threats and seek out rewards. And that's an evolutionary response, an evolutionary perspective. It's around the fact that to minimize threats means that we can stay alive, and to seek out rewards keeps us safe. Rewards from an evolutionary perspective would have been things like food and water and shelter. And change is perceived by our brain as a potential threat to life, and that triggers the fight or flight response. And from an evolutionary perspective, our brains have not evolved to be able to recognize a real threat, such as a woolly mammoth running towards you when we were hunter-gatherers, to a perceived threat, which is being told that you're moving to a hot desking type scenario. We filter and receive that information in exactly the same way as we always used to. And the threat response is it triggers our stress hormones, which is adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. And the reward response also triggers a hormone which is called dopamine, which is our kind of happy hormone. And I wanted to just use some examples of threat and reward in a workplace context to try and explain a bit more what I mean, which is actually reward at work, because this is what we're talking about here, is recognition, praise, being told we're doing a great job. And threat, things that trigger the threat response at work, is stress, criticism, lots of ambiguity, lots of change. And I've tagged on the Agile projects at the end there because we're really looking to break down the possession culture. And the ambiguity piece is interesting as well, because the other thing that our brain is hardwired to do is try and fill in the gaps. Our brain does not like ambiguity. Not knowing what's going to happen is actually a threat to us. And so we can find that when we're not communicating effectively, or we're not able to articulate to our people what the future state is going to look like and how the change is going to be different for them, that also triggers the threat response. So hopefully that's a little bit of useful information there. And I think that often organizational workplace change is not change that staff have chosen for themselves. That's normally change that is cascaded down onto them, and that triggers the threat response. And that's why you see some of the difficult reactions and the anger and the protest around things. And that's why I've used the title, Whose Chair Is It Anyway? Because people tend to feel very threatened and then very possessive over items and furniture that they perceive as theirs because they are in their threat state. Okay, so some of the things that can actually trigger the threat response and some of the difficult behaviours that we can see. This is called the SCARF model, and it's been developed by a psychologist called David Rock. And hopefully you will see some of these things. This will resonate with you. So one of the key triggers around moving people to an agile way of working is people perceive that these things are a threat to their status. And if you are working on a project where you are taking all of the managers out of offices and not having any offices and making everybody work in open planned, some of those more senior staff's previous perceptions may have been that I have worked my way up the ladder to get my own office. That is a sense of status. And you're now telling me that I can't have my own office and that I have to work alongside everybody else. That is triggering my threat response. The C is for certainty, being able to predict the future. I talked about that in the previous slide. Not having certainty and not being able to predict the future can trigger. Autonomy. We want to be able to have a sense of control over what's happening to us. And again, often decisions are made at a much higher level and we don't have that sense of autonomy, and that can bring about challenges to change. The R is for relatedness and a sense of safety with other people. If we feel that we are being singled out, or things are not happening in the right way, or people are not being supported, that will trigger. And the last thing is F for fairness, that people want to feel that they are being treated fairly and being treated with respect. And so that's really, really important that you feed all of these communication and engagement opportunities into your projects, so that we're not missing anything and not triggering the threat response in our people. Moving on in the same vein as thinking about some of the emotional reactions to change, maybe some of you are familiar with the change curve. And this is very much the process, the emotional process and the behaviors that people will experience when they are faced with a change that possibly they weren't expecting or that they don't agree with. And really the first part of the change curve are much more associated with the negative emotions. I'm sure many of you are smiling here when you see that there is the denial, that often people just do not want to engage, cannot acknowledge or cope with the fact that maybe we are moving them into a different way of working. And yeah, if I pretend it's not happening, it's really not happening. And then all of us would have been at the sharp end of some of the resistance and the anger around the change. But what happens, hopefully, is once people have processed those difficult emotions, they get to quite a low point where they have to accept that they need to let go, that the status quo is changing and the current state is not sustainable. And that can be quite a difficult period for people. But the good news is then you start to move up and out the other side. And this is where people start to engage with the change in a more meaningful way, dare to maybe feel a little excited, start to see that there might be some benefits for them, that there could be some more what's in it for me than they'd realized previously. But it can still be really an anxious time, and we need to be aware of that as a project team delivering change. New beginnings is people have processed and accepted the change. Doesn't mean that they have to like it and they're jumping up and down. It just means that they've accepted that it's going to happen. And then you would want to look for some enthusiasm, some trust in the process, being able to see that the change actually could be better for them. The key thing around the change curve is that people will experience things in their own time. Emotions are different. Emotions will come and go. And as a project team or an individual, you do need to accept that people will slip backwards and forwards on the change curve, or may just take slightly longer. The reason that you deploy kind of change management techniques is that you want people to move through the change curve as quickly as possible. Nobody wants people to stay around in the negative beginning phase of the change curve. And we're going to move on and talk a little bit about what you can do from a change management perspective to support people and move them through the change curve as swiftly and as painlessly as possible. So, enter stage right. What is change management? Change management, this is the ProSci definition. ProSci are one of the world leaders in change management methodologies and processes. Change management is the processes, tools and techniques to manage the people side of change to achieve the required business outcomes. That's that link back to people-dependent return on investment that I mentioned. Now, I love this drawing because this is the business of dealing with people. We've got our iceberg, and we know that 3/4 of the iceberg is below the waterline. So above the waterline, what you can see from the project perspective is the time, cost, quality, scope. That's the project management side of an agile project. But what lies below the waterline is the culture, how people feel, how ready people are to embrace the change. Are they ready to collaborate? And that's the big piece that change management space operates within. Ultimately, we have to remember that it's people that change, not organizations. So an organization can set a strategic direction, which could include an agile working project, and you can build the space. But unless people are willing to adapt and embrace it, you don't have a successful working space. And that's what I mean when I say that people change, not organizations. So that's an overview of the definition of change management, but hopefully this next set of pictures will actually reassure you that you are probably already considering many components that come together to make an effective change management approach. The first one of these is having robust and effective sponsorship and leadership. If you have a robust sponsor, it means that people can get behind the project more effectively. Business messages are best delivered by the sponsor rather than by the project team. If, for example, your sponsor is one of the people that's impacted by the project, you can use your sponsor to really be the advocate for the changes. They can maybe be some of the early adopters of the Agile project that you're wanting to implement. So having really effective sponsorship and leadership is key. Secondly is stakeholder management. That won't come as a surprise to any of you, but you know, stakeholders, people are people, and we have lots of different emotions, and we definitely need to understand and profile our stakeholders and understand how they might be feeling about the change and how they will be impacted by the change. And then you can develop an effective strategy to handle those different types of stakeholders. And your stakeholder management runs right through the project, all the way through out to the other side when they're working in the new agile environment. It doesn't just stop when you've delivered the project, it's ongoing so that you can focus on that R for reinforcement from the earlier model that I showed you. Communication. Communication. You cannot communicate enough. You have probably all been in situations where you feel that you have explained something to a group of people and everybody has taken away a slightly different message. It's really important that not only do you communicate outwards, but that you take the time to check in with people and make sure that your message was interpreted as you intended it to be and that it's been understood. Don't just assume because you said something a few times that people are on board and are on the same page as you. Also, don't assume that because the message came down once from your sponsor, that's sufficient. Messages, key benefits have to be communicated throughout the whole life cycle of your project. Okay, resistance management. Now, we will all have experienced resistance to agile working projects, but the key thing in change management is that we name it, we call it out, we understand from our stakeholder engagement what some of the possible causes of resistance to the project might be, and we take steps to actively manage that resistance. There can be a tendency to just pretend that resistance either isn't there or you acknowledge it's there but you choose not to do anything about it. That's a big mistake because that can often escalate and become quite difficult. So it's really key that you spend the time understanding what some of the challenges might be and taking steps to mitigate them all through the project. Coaching and training, did that the wrong way. Training is really key. So at the beginning, when I said all of the things that we're asking staff to do differently, maybe desk share, use a locker, use a booking system for new meeting rooms, or maybe a booking system for desks work from home. Staff need training and development in how to do all of these things. So it's really, really important that as a training plan put into place and effectively implemented. And again, just as communication, check back afterwards, check back in with people and make sure that they've understood effectively. Oopsie, what have I done? I'm going the wrong way, excuse me. Last thing is coaching and support. And hopefully you're getting the sense that the change is difficult, staff need support through the process, they need to be listened to, they need to be supported. Coaching and support, I deliver coaching and support to the team managers because the managers are the people that know their teams, but really important, no matter how you deliver it, that coaching and support is built into your plans. So that's the components of a change management approach. Often when I talk these things through, people go, oh, phew, I was doing a couple of these things, but I realize now that I just needed to spend a bit more time in the resistance space, in the coaching space. And some of these areas cross over with project management. Right. So just to start to wrap up now, why would you choose to deploy a change management approach? This is not an exhaustive list, but this is what I see in practice. Having an effective change management approach means that ultimately the changes are adopted quicker, which means your benefits are realized quicker, faster for the business. There is less resistance. There is a greater proficiency and take-up rate of different ways of working and using different types of technology. And all of this contributes to having the increased people-dependent return on investment. And there's a little statistic there that projects with effective change management approaches were whopping 5 to 6 times more successful than projects that didn't address the people side of change. And that is fairly recent data there. So we need these things to happen quickly, effectively, and this is why you would bring in change management into your projects. How? In addition to the earlier slide with the 6 little boxes there, this is a kind of my final wrap-up slide of what can you do, even if you're not a change management specialist. It's really, really important that you understand the process of change, that you recognize that the change curve is very real and people need time, people need to accept changes. Really, really importantly, you need to acknowledge the losses. I think it's really easy for us, as I said at the beginning, to focus on how it's going to be great and fabby-dabby, but we do need to acknowledge that for some staff, they are going to be feeling that they are losing, and so call that out. It's really, really important that we help staff visualize the new world and the future state, especially if they're in a working environment that really is quite traditional and old-fashioned. They just can't bridge the gap between the old and the new. So if you're able to show them renders, floor plans, engage them in furniture finishes, colors, all of those things to help them, it will really, really minimize the sense of anxiety and the resistance around the projects. Creating opportunities for engagement. Engagement is shown to be one of the greatest contributors to project success because engagement creates certainty. So it minimizes stress, it minimizes the threat response for people, and it will generate a sense of excitement around your projects. If people feel that they're part of the process, then they can get behind it and dare to feel excited. It's really important that we're creating opportunities for input. I've alluded to that already. Build people into your projects. Don't leave them on the outside. And again, you cannot over communicate enough, please, because Chinese whispers start really quickly, misunderstandings start really quickly. So having an effective and robust communication strategy is really, really important. Okay, so
Holly,
that's my
excellent
whiz through on an a change approach. Thank you all.
That's brilliant. No, Holly, thank you. That is absolutely excellent. And as you were saying through, and I was certainly nodding away my way through there. So I've got a few questions.
Sure, I will hopefully be able to answer them.
Okay. Have you got a top tip as to how to best identify what the resistances will be? Because that seems to be quite key, is understanding people and understanding what the potential concerns are. So how can you
Sure.
actually find that out?
Well, that's not a straightforward question. If you know your people and you are able to understand the extent of the change on them, then you should be able to, with some degree of certainty, be able to say they might be fine with this element of the project, but actually this piece over here could be quite controversial. It's about putting yourself in their shoes. If we just take the example of agile projects, I think I've alluded to some of the points of resistance there. Possession culture is one of the biggies. People will be resistant at the thought of not having their own personalized space. That really is a red flag for lots of people. I call those sorts of things hygiene factors. So people will be very upset about things that we might feel are fairly small and insignificant, like where will I put my pot plants? Where will my yoga mat go? What happens if I get in late? Surely hot desking will penalise the people that can't get into work early and bag all the good desks. I think you just have to be very honest and open and not just look at these things through the lens of the project. You really have to look at it through the lens of the people. I've often held focus groups and explained projects to staff and started to build my stakeholder maps and my resistance strategies through talking to the business, because even though you need to put yourself in their shoes, you can't be actually talking to your people. Sense check in with some people that will give you honest feedback.
Right.
Hopefully that's answered that question.
No, certainly. Thank you. I mean, so it's okay really to talk to people about their fears, isn't it? And get it from that, really.
Yes, you must.
Yeah.
Often a criticism that I hear a lot is that nobody actually acknowledged that we were having difficulties. So yes, talk to your people.
Okay, I've got a question here about where people can get more information about change management. Where could you point people
sure.
to?
Sure. So you could look up the Change Management Institute. They've got lots of information. If you are members of some of the project management bodies, such as P3O and APMG, they all have a lot of information about change management. And change management as a discipline has been around for a long time, but it's only really now kind of gathering pace because people are understanding that, as I said, staff change, not organizations, and people actually need support through those things. So those would be the three places that I would point people to in the first instance.
That's very helpful. Thank you. This is an interesting one. I've got a question that basically change has already occurred and there are problems. Can you apply this to try and rectify some of the concerns that are happening? Does that make sense?
It does. And that's the short answer. Yes, of course you can. So you can also use it as a bit of a diagnostic of where things have gone wrong. If I cast your mind back to the ADKAR steps, the awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement, were any of those steps missed? Is that why there's a sense of disengagement and some resistance? Did you not spend enough time doing your stakeholder management? Did you not spend enough time communicating? All of the things that I've pointed out come together to make a good change approach should also be your diagnostics to start to understand where things went wrong. Yeah. And ask people. Don't assume to know.
I think I've certainly been guilty of making assumptions in the past. This one is interesting. It's all about how to facilitate groups of people to get team working, how you can sort of help them manage a change in the way they work, I suppose, rather than the physical location. In fact, they're going to have to work with different teams. Any top tips for them?
Yes. Well, broadly, you need to be able to articulate what the future is going to look like, how the space is going to work, and then you can really let the staff run with it. Staff will know how best to change their ways of working. We can't presume to know on behalf of the staff. So I see the role of the project team and the change managers is really giving them some certainty about what's changing and what's staying the same, and then just being there as a critical friend to help them understand, because we don't know their working practices, only the teams know their working practices. So we can't presume to put a process in for them. We can just be there and help them to think slightly differently and articulate, yes, that would work, or no, that wouldn't, because the space won't facilitate it. But really, people know their own work and their own processes, so they need to really be co-creators in that new way of working. I hope that makes sense.
I think it does. I think there's also a little bit, which I'll just go over now. I think they're sort of talking about some people maybe being precious about what they do and sharing it and that sort of thing. And I think what you've been saying is really just being quite clear and try and reassure them that there isn't a threat about working together, to sort of stop the tribalism in a way. I suppose would you agree with that?
Yes, there is always that every team always thinks that their work is more private and confidential than anybody else's, that they need space for quiet working more than anybody else. They can't work in that particular way because that's very normal. And it's just it's that kind of denial piece that everybody, and also that everybody wants to feel that their work is slightly different. It's around status. So you need to give people time and space, and also ask them, you may feel that you need to work in the same way, but this is going to be the new model. This is what's being determined. What are the small steps that you can make that will move you in the right direction? Because this change is going to happen. So we need to be really thinking in a constructive way, even if it's baby steps, about how we can move people on. But yeah, it's quite normal. And the difficult thing with these projects is most of the time, 90% of the time, people's concerns around changes to ways of working, privacy, confidentiality, noise, and disruption, they are not fully realized. But we have to hold that space, that tension in the middle, until they are in that new space. And that is difficult. But don't give up.
It sounds a bit like bringing up children, actually. I think there's a lot of there, because you can't always give good news, can you? But you have to put a balance on it. So
yeah, and also I just had one more thing to say on that, because I've been delivering lots of training this week about, yes, you sometimes have to give bad news, but on an individual level, people have to take responsibility. You can do so much. You can guide them through the process. You can help them. They can help shape the final solution. But once you've done all of those things, you have to accept that you won't bring everybody with you. That does just happen. There is a sense of responsibility on the individual to choose to engage constructively.
I think on that note, Holly, thank you very much indeed. That's been fascinating. There's been a few other things come through, which I may put to you if you don't mind, and then we can just pop them on the website. There's a few minor things on there. And I think really just say thank you so much. That's been great, and a great way to go to the weekend and have a bit of thought process. I think there's certainly some things I need to put into action. I hope that's been interesting for everybody else. And I think really I'm going to let you get on with your Fridays and making your way to the weekend. And I look forward to hearing from you all soon. So thank you once again, Holly. And
you're welcome. Bye, everyone.
Bye from Posturite. Okay, goodbye.
Bye.